There's a quote I came across a while back, but I can't quite recall the source. It might have been an actor or a director who said this, but what was said is that Hollywood always likes to intervene and put their spin on established popular franchises or characters. And that couldn't have been more evident than with the title of this movie, Let There Be Carnage. It actually sounds like a title that's more appropriate for a YouTube video. There are plenty of Carnage titles available, and if I want to be more accurate, there's actually a plethora of pre-established alternate Carnage titles they could have chosen instead of Let There Be Carnage. There's Venom Carnage Unleashed, Carnage USA, Superior Carnage, Carnage Born, Carnage Mind Bomb, Venom vs. Carnage, Absolute Carnage, and there's even a more recent Carnage title that seemed to coincide with the release of the movie called Extreme Carnage. Or they could have just gone with the more widely known Carnage title that was actually adapted into a video game, Maximum Carnage. This is a title that would have elicited nostalgia, something that Hollywood seems to love, and it would have probably trended on Twitter. But instead, the Suit and Ties thought it would be suitable to call it Let There Be Carnage. Before we get started with the review, I do have to mention that there will be spoilers ahead, something that I failed to mention in my other reviews, so continue to watch with that in mind. The first act of this movie was some of the most uninspiring pieces of media I've watched in a long time. It all felt stunted, like things were just happening. There was no plot progression. It felt like they just had us waiting till the eventual escape of Cletus Cassidy. A plot thread that was introduced was Venom being ravenous. They do revisit this later in the film, but it doesn't do much for the character of Venom. So Venom is hungry and he wants to eat human brains because apparently his current diet of chocolate and chickens isn't providing him the sufficient amount of energy. And honestly, I thought this was a setup that was eventually going to play out with his eventual battle with Carnage. I thought Venom was going to have a battle with Carnage where he loses because of his weakened state. And then after acknowledging that this is going to be a hindrance in saving the city from this monster, before they face him one last time, they have to solve this diet dilemma. But instead, this is just completely omitted. We do end up getting a weakened Venom fighting Carnage, but it isn't because of the aforementioned plot thread. Instead, it's Venom admitting to Eddie that they're no match for Carnage. He's just too strong. I honestly thought that having that visual of a feeble Venom would have been the appropriate time to bring up that plot thread, but they didn't. There's a scene where Venom is climbing up a cathedral, and that's where we get the visual of a weak Venom. And this whole time my head is just telling me he's weak because he needs to eat. That's what the movie told us. But the characters aren't discussing that. It just felt very awkward. When they eventually defeat Carnage, Venom actually consumes the symbiote of Carnage and then he chomps on Cletus's head. And as I'm seeing Venom eat Cletus and Carnage, again, my brain is reverting back to the information that we know that Venom is hungry. So I'm telling myself, like, of course he would eat them. It's almost like the director wanted to incorporate that angle into the character of Venom, but they forgot to write more than one draft for this movie. I mean, Eddie even encourages Venom to keep fighting by promising him that he can feed on anyone who is at the church if he fights Carnage. Because in this movie, Venom is afraid of Carnage. Well, sort of. It's all played for gags. This whole movie is just a comedy. So we get this scene where Cletus and Shriek are getting married and the father gives that line where, you know, if anyone is opposed, to make it known. And very conveniently, here comes Venom bursting through the doors. So then Cletus then morphs into Carnage and that's when Venom cowers away. So Venom turns back into Eddie and they have their little inner consciousness dialogue that is played for the gags. And this is when Eddie tells Venom if he keeps fighting, he can eat anyone in the church except the father. Something that I thought was very unnecessary in this movie was this reconciliation arc that Venom and Eddie undergo. So they're at the apartment and they're arguing and fighting with each other, and they end up breaking up and they separate. Literally, like Venom leaves, and after all of this, Eddie seems to be getting happier. It's almost like a weight was lifted off his shoulder. He even starts cleaning his unsanitary apartment where he had 2 chickens living with him. And I'm pretty sure some people are probably gonna have their theories about how Venom is probably parasitically draining the life out of Eddie. But I think Eddie becoming happier after Venom leaves has to do more with the responsibility of being a hero, an anonymous hero. Anyways, this whole separation angle culminates when Anne, who is Eddie's ex, helps Venom and Eddie come back together and make amends so that they can go on and have their fight with the big bad Mr. Red. I just felt like this was totally unnecessary. Like, why did the movie need this reconciliation arc? Why is this how we get Venom to go on to fight Carnage? It just felt lame. This movie is very uncreative. It's like badly written fan fiction that's written by a teenage kid who just went through his first breakup, and this is his cope mechanism, writing fan fiction. Let me talk about more uncreative ideas that plagues this movie, like the origins of Carnage. Eddie goes back to visit Cletus in prison, and they're arguing, and then Venom gets angry at something that Cletus told Eddie, and he starts to manhandle him around the cell. But then Cletus gets a hold of Eddie's hand and he bites him. So Cletus ends up consuming some of Eddie's blood. He takes a look at the blood and it has these little tendrils, and that's how Carnage was conceived in this movie, through a bite. It's not the most terrible way to introduce Carnage, but I just thought the whole plot beat of Eddie going to the prison and getting bit, and that's how Cletus ends up bonding with the symbiote, I just thought it was lackluster. Something that became very apparent to me from the opening scene of this film where it introduces Cletus Cassidy was that this movie would have benefited from being a horror thriller. It would have been great if they would have just given this movie just some more time to develop the character of Cletus. Have him going around committing some murders, taking Eddie and the other detective on a goose chase. And then imagine if Cletus ends up targeting Eddie and they have a sort of a confrontation scene where Cletus is hunting Eddie down, trying to kill him. And that's where Eddie would end up getting bitten by Cletus, which would make sense because he's a cannibal. So he'd be trying to eat Eddie. And as Cletus has a firm bite on Eddie, that's when he starts to turn into Venom. But not before Cletus gets to bite a chunk out of the symbiote, and that's what gives birth to Carnage. The reveal of Carnage should have been something that was horrifying to the audiences watching, because you got this serial killer cannibal who bonds with this alien symbiote, which then turns them into a literal monster. I thought that Carnage should have been a creature that had that same imposing presence that someone like the Predator had in that first movie. If only these studios cared enough to make something serious and that was somewhat grounded in reality, that would make these creatures feel like something that we could potentially encounter in real life, then we would have had a real film. But instead we just get these 2 giant CGI toys fighting each other. I didn't entirely dislike the CGI Carnage. I thought the model for it was great. Carnage has always looked like the muscular anatomy, and I was happy to see him portrayed that way in this movie. Unfortunately though, in this movie, he also looks like decaying flesh. It reminded me of Jackie Earle Haley's Freddy Krueger, the way his skin looked, the texture of it. Woody Harrelson's portrayal of Cletus Cassidy was somewhat reflective of the one we get in the comic books. Cletus Cassidy has always been a stereotype of serial killers. You know, the unhinged, chaotic, comical killer.
Don't I get a goodbye kiss? Or are you afraid I'm gonna bite?
And I actually thought Woody was a little bit too tame. I didn't think he went comical enough. Another character we get in this film is Shriek, whom is dating Cletus. They attempted to create a sort of a Bonnie and Clyde chemistry between them, but they failed horribly. I did think that the rift between Cletus and Carnage being in conflict over Carnage not taking a liking to Shriek because of her superpowers had the basis of something that could have been interesting. But of course, it's a comedy, so they don't fully explore that aspect. I mean, this whole movie just doesn't have an iota of seriousness. It's all played for gags. Venom is pretty much a comedy prop for Eddie's consciousness. If a creature that was supposed to be a living nightmare gets turned into a comedy as your thing, well, awesome. Something I've heard thrown out there is that these Venom movies are the type of films that are so bad that they end up being good, which I completely disagree with that. Movies that are so bad they end up becoming cult classics are films that were created by someone who believed they were making something good. But it's actually all due to their ineptitude that you get a film so peculiar it becomes a fascination to analyze. It's almost like when you attempt to draw something that you visualize, but you don't have the skills to actually draw it. This movie was intentionally made to be bad. And to me, the finished product just wasn't entertaining. It's just a goof fest of people patting themselves in the back thinking they made a haha funny thing. After watching this film, whether you liked it or not, I think the verdict amongst everyone should be that Sony did not allow the carnage. Sure, Carnage gets some kills, but there's no blood and they're pretty much done off screen. I believe the only blood we see is the CGI blood when Cletus bites Eddie. Cletus Cassidy is a cannibal, a serial killer. If anyone makes the argument that this movie is for kids, I fail to understand how introducing the idea of a cannibalistic serial killer and promoting it to kids as a toy is more obscene. Anyways, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Hi everyone, I'm the Tinysapien Alvee. If you enjoyed what you just watched, leave a like, hit the subscribe, and if you want more, click the notification bell so you can get notified the next time I upload a video. Thanks for watching and thank you for your time.